Welcome everyone to the monthly meeting of the Jewish Genealogical Society of Montreal. We're delighted to have you with us wherever you are, whatever time of the day it is. If some of you are in the middle of the night, then we thank you for joining us. In any case, we enjoy being able to bring you our sessions wherever you are. And tonight we have a special session. Tonight, our guest speaker is JGS-Montreal member Gary Perlman, winner of the Volunteer of the Year Award of the IAJGS, the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies. Gary has a long technical history, and I'm not going to reel off his incredible background. However, I will say that he's our webmaster, and over the years has developed a remarkable, convenient search method in the form of the JGS-Montreal dashboard. And so tonight he will demonstrate the dashboard, and perhaps we'll be able to answer some questions and try a few searches for people, but we'll let Gary decide on that. And so before we go any further, I want to turn you over to Vicki Barkoff with a few technical presentation. You're muted.
There. Now you should be able to hear me. If you have any questions or comments, please enter them into the chat section, which will be either under or to the right of the video screen, the YouTube video. We had a problem in the past that people couldn't see links to web pages or emails that had been posted in chat. And the way to avoid that is to set your chat to live chat instead of top chat. At the very top of the chat section, it probably says top chat, and you can switch that to live chat. You'll be able to see any links to emails or web pages if you do that. And after Gary is finished, we'll try to answer any questions that you've entered. Stanley?
Gary, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Stanley. I'm going to turn down the volume on my speaker, so it's very hard for me to hear things, but I'll mostly be talking. You might have to wave to me to attract my attention. I'm going to share a screen now. Okay, so this is a very lightly annotated talk. Most of the talk will be demonstrations. My goal for the presentation will be to allow you to do more efficient research for Jewish records, Montreal, especially Quebec and Canada. I'm going to start with a quick demonstration, and we'll go from there. And I'll start that from the JGS Montreal homepage. And I'll go down to the bottom, and there's a little form here. And I'm going to put in my great-grandfather's name, Grief, Nathan, and this is the dashboard. Rather than tell you a lot about the dashboard, what I'm going to do is do some searches. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the death section, and I'm going to look for a burial record in Joburg. There's Jewish Jen asking for money, and there is Nathan Grief. And I can take a look at that record. And so I've gotten to that, and I've seen a picture of his gravestone. I can also go over to our website, where we have more detailed records than you get in Joburg. And so there's more pictures. Here's a picture of his gravestone, and in the background is Riva, his wife, my great-grandmother. So you can quickly move around. If we go back to the dashboard, I'm going to look for naturalization information. So I'm going to go to the naturalization section, and I'm going to look in the Montreal Circuit Court. And one of the things about this particular site, Libraries and Archives Canada, is that it can be a really slow site, but so far it's cooperating. And we're going to look at his record, and this is the right person. There's his business card, iron, metal, scrap paper, and old books. I come from a long line of junk dealers. Both my paternal grandparents were junk dealers or children of junk dealers. They're just all over the place. Over here, I can open up this image in a new tab and we can take a look at it. And here's Nathan Grief, 48 years old, from Czernowitz in Bukovina. And he naturalized in 1913. He's been here for 9 years, so he arrived around 1904. You can see from his signature that he might not be a native English speaker. We can go back to the dashboard, and instead of looking in the Montreal Circuit Court, which is just 1900 to 1915 or so, we can look for Canadian naturalizations. These are imperial certificates of naturalization, and we can take a look in there, and we found nothing. So instead of looking for him, I'll just look for Grief, and I didn't do it right. So I'll get back there. That should work better. And we're waiting and waiting. And we got a bunch of Grief. These are Alex, Harry, and Meyer are sons. Dora is a daughter. Moses might be a nephew. We don't know. Let's see.
Gary,
I'm going to look in the census
Gary,
now.
Gary, can you hear me?
Yes.
Some people have commented that they're a little bit lost. I'm wondering if you could start with a dashboard, like just how do you get all this, like that you enter, where you enter, like assume someone has never used the dashboard.
Okay.
Because we have a few people that are, wondering how you have jumped to all of this.
Okay.
So take us back a bit. Thanks.
Okay. This is simpler than you might think, but here we are on the home screen of JGS Montreal, and at the bottom of the screen, I put in a surname and a given name. And when I go to the dashboard, then there's a bunch of fields that have been filled in. So it's like I went here to put in Grief and Nathan, and there's a bunch of forms all over this dashboard, all set to do searches. And so all that I have to do a search is to click on one of these searches. So for example, if I wanted to look for a gravestone in another place, I could look and find a grave with one click. And I'm there. One of the nice things about Find a Grave is that it gives the spouse and also links to all the children. We could look in billion graves. We can look in Jewish data. We could look in all of these different places with one click. So now I'm going to pop up to the census. I can look for the 1911 census. There's several different sources for this. And there's Alex, Belia, which is actually my grandmother Bella, but spelling is not necessarily good and handwriting is not necessarily good. But here's Nathan and here's Rebecca. And so they're all there on St. Anne Street West. I can go back to the dashboard and there's other censuses. I can look in the 1921 census of Canada in Ancestry. And so there's Nathan Grief. My great-grandmother is now Rosa, and instead of Rebecca, on her gravestone it's Riva. You get used to these things, but here's Nathan Grief, and there's Samuel and Sarah. Maggie is a son, because it should be Meyer, but who knows what the spelling looks like or the transcription. And Bella is actually my grandmother. We can look in a variety of places, but maybe we'll stop with that for the census. I'm going to look for an obituary. Those are in the death section, so there's a bunch of obituaries like Montreal Gazette, Genealogy Quebec obituaries, and so on. One resource is the Canada Adler obituaries. This was a Yiddish newspaper for Montreal. It has records from 1908 to 1935, and we can look for Nathan Grief. We didn't find any, so I'm going to try just Grief. And I found two. I found Nellie Grief, and I don't know who this is, but it doesn't look very promising. Nellie Grief is my great aunt, but I'm going to use my knowledge of this particular resource, and I'm going to spell Grief in a different way. And there's Naphtali. I can do a search, and I find two records, both for Naphtali, and I can open them up and see what they look like. This one looks like a death record from September 5th. And this one looks like an unveiling from November 21 or November 22. Okay, back to the dashboard. I'm going to jump down to family trees. And I have a hunch that there's that Nathan Grief is in a family tree on genie.com. There he is. And although it's the last place I'm looking for Nathan Grief, it's probably a good idea to be the first place that you search, because if you find a family tree, then you find a lot more information than these individual sources. So this family tree, he has 541 people in this tree. He has 143 descendants. So that's quite a bit of information. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to describe the dashboard. I'm going to talk about the origins of it and tell you a bit about what the various parts are. And hopefully it'll be less confusing, but the idea is still going to be that you can, in a few clicks, do a lot of searches. And I'll tell you why it arose. So I went to some family tree workshops on Sunday mornings with Stanley Diamond, and I was very impressed by all of the resources that Stanley went through. I went to a few of these, and then for some reason I thought it would be a good idea to be a volunteer genealogist at Maimonides. I probably wasn't qualified enough, but I knew enough to find useful information. So I've done family trees for about over 20 residents at Maimonides. So these are whole family trees of the whole families. And I go through, for each of these, many resources for many people, what I call bulk genealogy. So for any family, you're going to look at initially 10 to 20 people right away. And it's going to be name variations. So there's, even more people. And I'm going to look at 10 to 20 different resources. So that's, on the first day, we're talking about 100 to 400 searches. And so if you're starting on research for a family, that's about how many searches you have to do initially. based on a lot of that work, I created a workshop handout, which sometimes gets distributed, but not so much anymore. But it has links to the most commonly used resources. And I started handing these out because people would come to Sunday morning family tree workshops and they would be frantically writing down URLs. So instead of them frantically writing these down, they could just have them already down. Although those of you who have come to Stanley's workshops knows that 8 resources. Stanley uses a lot more than 8 resources in one family tree workshop. He's a great user of resources. Now, some of these places that I would go to, these are the top level places, JRY Poland, whatever, and it might be several steps to get from that top level, from that home page to a search screen. And once I got to any search screen, I had to retype the information. And so that's one of the main ideas is to have the dashboard and not have to retype the information. It's just already there, already filled in. The other thing, maybe the key idea, was to add forms to each of these resources. So instead of having just the link to the home page, there would be input fields with a last name and a first name or whatever could be used to do a search. So there would be less retyping and more immediate access to the search forms. So you can think of the dashboard here as just a big list of resources. And in fact, if you print this out, I'll give a try for that. If you print this out, it doesn't show you the forms. It shows you instead the links that are displayed, and it shows you more detailed information about each of these. So I'm not going to print that out. So that's the main idea of the dashboard. So that's all you need to know. Okay, the rest of the presentation is demonstrations and more explanations. So of the resources, there's about 100 resources on the dashboard, and there's documentation about those resources, and the forms have 2 or 3 parameters. So here's the Drouin collection. You have surname and a given name, but the Archives of Montreal, that's just free form. Same with the Montreal Gazette in newspapers.com. It doesn't have separate fields for first and last names. Now, some of the resources are limited to a locale. So these are limited to Quebec. These are Quebec. Montreal Images is limited to Montreal. There are dates attached to some of these. So the Quebec Civil Registry is 1898 to 1916. And Montreal Business Records, 1849 to 1967. Some of them are free. Some of them require a subscription. Some of them are in French. And some of them have little help buttons, which tell you about the search syntax typically of when you're searching on this site, what are you allowed to do? How do you do wildcards? How do you match more than you'd ordinarily expect by just typing in the name? Some forms have 1 parameter, some have 2. There are groups of resources, and so you can access them with the navigation menu. So, okay, here's the dashboard, and here's general resources. Here's Jewish resources, here's death records, here's Quebec and Montreal, here's naturalization. We can jump down to societies, we can go to family trees. It's not scrolling anymore, but these are where you can search for family trees. So I'm not going to tell you a lot about the different sections, but one is Census of Canada, for 1901, 1911, and 1921. And some of them are searching in Ancestry, some of them are searching in Library of Archives Canada, and one is searching in a Quebec resource. There's Canadian naturalization, and some people naturalized in the Montreal Circuit Court, and some people naturalized by sending forms to Ottawa, and that was a different form, a more it gave them more rights as Canadian citizens than if they had naturalized in the Montreal Circuit Court. It's kind of obscure, but that's how people did things. And sometimes you had people naturalizing in the Montreal Circuit Court and naturalizing federally to be able to travel more easily. Also under naturalization, there's some resources that I hardly ever use, but, okay, go to naturalization. One is records from the Russian Empire immigrants, and one is Ukrainian immigrants. Now, if you had to go to the website and search Russian Empire immigrants, and first you'd have to find it, and you'd have to get there and type in the information, well, that's a bit of work, and maybe you wouldn't do it. But here is just one click. And so I have found people in my family who ended up immigrating as an immigrant from the Russian Empire. Excuse me. Okay. There's resources for Quebec and Montreal, including the Drouin collection. We'll take a look at some of those. There's Genealogy Quebec, which unfortunately does not allow for search externally. So when I go to Genealogy Quebec, I have to go to their website. It's a nice website, has a lot of useful information on marriages and deaths, but I have to enter the information each time for each person. That's a little annoying. So annoying that I contacted them and said, hey, why don't you provide a search method? And they said no. So that's too bad. There's actually other things at the Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales de Québec, like Lovell's Directory and Civil Registry and Business Record, none of which can be searched externally. For Montreal and Quebec, there is the newspapers.com, which has a very good version of the Montreal Gazette. It's a great resource, but it is $100 a year. There's death and burial records. So there's obituaries, several different sources for them. There's burial records in, for example, Jober at Jewish Gen. And also there's some hidden resources that I use when I'm compiling information for cemetery records. For example, I search on paperman.com and also in the new Baron de Hirsch website to find locations of people. There's Jewish resources, including Jewish Gen, the place to start Jewish genealogical research. There's JRI Poland, which Stanley is the founder and executive director of, which has millions of records on genealogical records from Poland and surrounding areas. There's Canadian Jewish newspapers. There's the Canadian Jewish Heritage Network, which includes the Canadian Jewish Archives. There's Yad Vashem, which has Shoah victims. And then there's general areas like Ancestry and WorldCat and Google newspapers, even Facebook, and so on. There's societies which have no search interfaces, and there's online family trees, including Ancestry, Genie, MyHeritage, Family Search, which can't be searched online. And there's the family tree of the Jewish people, at JewishGen. Okay. Parameters and options. There's just various fields. You fill in these fields at the top, and then they appear in various forms down below. Some forms like Jober or JewishGen have extra parameters, so you can specify that you want to search a name phonetically or using soundex or starting with whatever you type in, an exact match, and 3 fuzzy searches, for example. And there's also options at the top of the dashboard. One that I use right away is to hide the help, because I don't need to be told what is the ID of the dashboard. You can show descriptions, which shows more information about each resource. And instead of each search going into the same window, you can have it go into a different window. And I don't expect someone to use it until they say, hey, what happened to my old results? And then you can use that option to do that. Okay, back to demonstrations. We've done Nathan Grief, and now we're going to do Abraham Perlman, who was my great-grandfather. And I'm going to put in a maiden name as Perlman, because that was his name. But everyone changed their name to Perlman eventually. Okay. So I'm going to first search for a death record. And I'm going to go into Jober. And so here's 1 person in Ontario, 9 people in Quebec. And I go down here eventually. Okay, I found them. And I can look at the full record for that. And like Nathan Grief, there's a link for more information. So I can do that. And there's various other information. There's a picture of the back of the grave. There's the context for the grave. So 1, 2, 3, he's 4th in from the path. And I can also do research from here. So if I do research from here, well, it calls up the genealogy dashboard with Abraham Perlman again. So we're back where we started from. But the point is that you could find something in Jober and click for more information. And from that record, you can start doing research. Okay. There's other places to look, so I can look for him in Find a Grave. There he is. And there's his picture. How about that? I can search in Billion Graves, which is another resource, so kind of like Find a Grave. There's a whole bunch of Abraham Perlmans, and there's my Abraham Perlman. And I'm not too surprised to find it because I'm the photographer and the transcriber of the information. I can go into the census, and I can try searching for the 1911 census from this form. Didn't find anything, but this resource, Automated Genealogy, has related names that sound alike. And if I search for Perlman, I'm going to sort these by geographic location. Now, there's Abraham, there's Leah, there's my Auntie Minnie, Harry, that is Meyer, but it wasn't really well done. Rebecca, that's my Aunt Betty. Ice is my grandfather Izzy, and there's Ida and Fanny, and Louis. I don't know who Louis is, but Louis is on a different page, so he's not part of that family. Fanny was the only Perlman who was born in Montreal. So she's 8 out of 12 months old. As they got older, Fanny got married, and in one census, I think by the 1921 census, Ida somehow became the youngest in the family. And so she has different dates of birth in every census, and in her marriage record, a different date, and in her death record, a different date. No one knows how old she is. We can go into naturalization and look in the Montreal Circuit Court. This is so fast. It can go off for minutes. But that didn't work. But I'm going to use the help here. And it says your search term can match anywhere within the names beginning, middle, or end. Okay. So I'm going to make this a much more general search. Maybe it's Abram. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's Perlman, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's Perlman. And so I'm just going to search with those two. And there's Abram Perlman. And we can see him. And the nice thing about the Montreal Circuit Court is that the records are scanned and online. You can view them immediately. And so I can open this in a new tab and we can take a look at it. And so here's Abram Perlman. He's from, I don't know how to say it, Wolin. And he's a junk dealer. I wasn't kidding about the junk dealers. Just a long line of junk dealers. And so that's another example of search. We could also look for Perlman naturalizations, just in general, in the federal records. And it wouldn't include P-E-A-R-L, and it wouldn't include P-E-R-E-L-M-A-N. And there's 37. And one nice new feature on this site is I can just type in ABR and there's no matches. I can look for my grandfather, Izzy, Isidore. It's neither of those. So even though there are several pages of these, they've all been loaded into the page and you can go through them very quickly. I'm going to look for Russian Empire immigrants. I'm hoping it's going to come up pretty soon, but I'll give it 5 seconds. And it didn't find any. So I'm going to look for just PER. Now, one thing is that these things are not, there's not that many cases. So here's 11. So I typed in MAN because that matches the MAN at the end of the term. So it's PER, anything with MAN. And if I look through these, I find Perlman with 2 N's, and Nachman. And Nachman is my great-grandfather's brother. And that's his picture. So that's a pretty good find. And one of the reasons why I found it was that I didn't have to do any work for it. Like I had to click on one thing and I had to do an adjustment to a search. And so that makes it easier. So I could even go and look for Ukrainian immigrants. I don't think it would be in there, but it's not a lot of work, not a lot of extra work to do. And finally, let's see, I'm going to look for trees, and I can look on ancestry, see if I find Abraham Perlman, spouse Celia Freed, no, spouse Leah Schwartz. So that's pretty good. Oh, that's actually an extraction of my MyHeritage tree. So I didn't find any new information. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a second and wonder, I could search for more of my great-grandparents, and I know I will find things, or I could search for people who others are interested in, or I could do some famous people such as Leonard Cohen. I'll leave that as a possibility, and I'll go back to the demonstrations, and I'll look for Sam Schmolik, and I'll search in the same usual places. So I can look in naturalizations, and I can look in the Montreal Circuit Court. I didn't find any, but I do know there's another spelling. And so I'll try that. And I searched in the wrong place. I just searched in the Drouin collection. I'm going to adjust this for different spelling. And indeed, there is 1913 naturalization of Sam Schmolik. And take a look at this in a new tab. And he's from Shishlovich, near Minsk, Russia. He's a tailor. And this is sort of fun. Here is his signature in Jewish. So you can see why, like, he didn't know how to write his name in English. And so this is how it was written once. It turns out that different people in my family naturalized and used this spelling, and also the SCH-MULICK. One person naturalized twice for two different husbands, and in one she used this spelling, and in one she used the other spelling. Let's see, I can look in Find a Grave for burial, and there's all his children, there's his wife. I can look in Canadian Jewish newspapers. You can search them through Google, and I didn't find any. It said maybe this spelling, so it knows about different spellings. And Reuben Schmolik is actually my grandfather. I can look in the Canadian Jewish Heritage Network, and we'll see if I find anything. I didn't, so I'm going to just look for the last name. It's not there, so I'm going to simplify it. And you can see how this particular website gives you previews of things that match. And so here's Shmulevich, and this is actually my grandfather, my great-grandfather, signing up with the Hebrew Sick Benefit Association. His wife is Chaya Sarah Diltzer. I don't think that's correct, but that's what we got. Okay, so now I'm going to search in Jewish resources, and I'm going to look in Yad Vashem. I'm going to just search for the Schmolik family name. Yad Vashem is a database of Shoah victims. So I don't really want to find anyone here, but there's a lot of Schmoliks unaccounted for. I only know of Sam and his sister Sonia. And I have to think there must be more. And it's not coming back with anything. I can go into trees. I can search in, say, ancestry. And so here is Sam Schmolik, Chaya Sarah Seltzer. Okay, that looks like a better name. And that's from a Maxwell Kaplan family tree. So, so there's a possible new source of information. Maybe that's a relative. who has made a family tree. I can also search in Genie, and whenever I search in Genie, I tend to find my own family trees. Okay. So the last great-grandparent is Abram Victor. I can go into the census, and I can search the 1901 census. And that didn't work. That's in Library of Archives Canada. Now I'm going to search in Ancestry. And that didn't match anything. So now I'll try 1911. And there's Abraham Victor from Romania, and his relative is Ili. Okay. If I take a look at that record, I can see Ili Doc L Lula. This I have to look at. Okay, this is the worst writing I've seen in a while. This is my Auntie Dora. This is Willie. That G is Gertie. Well, anyway, sometimes you get good records and sometimes you don't. I can look for naturalization of Abram Victor in the Montreal Circuit Court. And so here's Abram Victor from Berlad, Romania. And it doesn't say when he came. Maybe that's on another page, but the main point is that there was a record right there. I can also look in federal naturalization records. And here's Abram Victor. And what you get from this database, which was compiled by, I believe, the wife of Stanley Diamond. And I'm looking for Victor. Okay, so there's Abram Victor, and there is Jeanette Rudman, my great-grandmother, his wife, and they're in Montreal, Quebec. I can look in the Drouin collection. So if we look in Quebec, here's the Drouin collection for Abram Victor. And here he is getting married in 1901 to Jeanette Rudman. So that's pretty good. That's an early marriage. I can look in obituaries. I can look in death records. So these Quebec obituaries are from 2000 to the present. Those are online. These obituaries are from newspapers.com. And he died in 1963. And so here's an obituary. And I think there's another one there. I don't have access to this database, but it gets you close enough that you would know if you wanted to get a subscription for some period. Finally, I can go into something like Find a Grave. And there's Abram Victor. And there's his parents and his siblings, his spouse, and 4 children. I can look into Jewish resources like the Canadian Jewish Review. So there's Abram Victor on Van Horn Avenue. There's Mrs. Abram Victor. Lillian, that's my grandmother, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Abram Victor. 1929, that's when she got married. So I can look up these things and see various birth, death, and marriage announcements. Finally, we can go to various trees. And so I can look in Ancestry, see if I find a tree. This is the Feldman Nussbaum forest. So there's Jeanette Victor. His mother is Cecil, his father is Moses. So there's a possible source of information, or maybe even a relative of mine. I should check into that. Another source is on Jewish Gen, the family tree of the Jewish people. They're asking for money. And if I look through here, there's Jeanette Rudman, there's Abram Victor. So there's my great-grandfather in another place. And you never know what you're going to find in these trees, but I'll tell you, this tree doesn't look that great because there's my wife, there's me living Perlman. My sibling is living Perlman, and my sibling is Marcia Small Schmolik. So my mother is my sibling in this family tree. So I'm going to be suspicious of the quality of the information in this tree. Okay, so that ends the demonstrations for my family. I'll tell you about some of the feature of the dashboard. One is enhancing the resources with search. So I've already shown you an example of when you go into Jober and you find one of our records, there's a link to more information, and that detailed record has a link to search with the dashboard. So there might be information in the record, but there's also just a few clicks away from checking for things like obituaries and family trees and so on. There's also the possibility of adding resources. As resources change, I do update the dashboard so that searches still work. Sites change all the time, and you can't necessarily depend on them to be able to search in exactly the same way. But the dashboard can be adjusted to those. When a new resource comes along, then I can add that to the dashboard if it's useful. So one new resource is the Baron-de-Hirsch Cemetery, which has all the records for their burials on De La Savane and also the Back River. I haven't added that to the dashboard for one reason, and that's that that information is already in Jober. And so, and it's actually more accurate information and more comprehensive information than the information that Baron-de-Hirsch has. There's another example of a resource that I wouldn't ordinarily put there. If we go to death records, here's one for Ottawa Jewish cemeteries. So I ordinarily wouldn't put that there, but the photos for the Ottawa cemeteries are available, but they're not available in Jober. So I can look for, in fact, I'll just go to the top and I'll, I know that there's lots of Tollers. And I can't remember the first name, so I'll just go. And I'll go to death, and I'll look in Ottawa for the Tollers. And so this database has a couple of Ann Tollers. If you go to the record, you can see the headstones, and you can also see where they are in the cemetery. That's a very nice feature. But those photos are not inside Jober. And so that's the reason why I added that particular resource to the death and burial searches. There's nothing stopping me from, say, adding something for searching Ontario records, for example. I'm not quite sure where they would go. They would not belong in Quebec and Montreal. But you can imagine, instead of it being Quebec and Montreal, there could be a separate section for Ontario and Toronto, or things in Montreal could disappear and things in Toronto could appear. Okay, finally, organizing searches for a family. When I do searches for like a new family at Maimonides, I need to do a lot of searches, and I just enter some names like this. And as I gather information like their Hebrew names, or they have a record in genie.com, I know dates and so on. I know about their spouses, naturalization, census, and so on. I can create a display of all of these that keeps track of all the information that I've gathered, but I can also just do a search. So these just click to Lillian Victor Small, my grandmother, and she's born in Quebec, so I don't think she's going to be naturalizing. Lillian and Small and Small. So I'm going to edit this search, and I'm going to get birth around 1906. There's Lillian Victor getting married. And so maybe that's all the information I have. So she married Reuben Small, my grandfather. The point being that I need ways of searching for a lot of people relatively quickly. When you go to the dashboard and you find a search that you like, one thing you can do is you can bookmark it. So here's a bookmark. So if I click on that and it looks exactly the same, I'm going to hide help because I'm tired of seeing it, and I can bookmark that, and I can copy this and make a bookmark in a list of bookmarks so that I can pretty quickly search for people. So, in conclusion, there's a lot of resources gathered in one place. Some might be less well known than others. It avoids doing a lot of navigation through sites and repeated typing. I think I've demonstrated that it's good to know each of the resources search syntax, knowing how to do wildcards, and knowing what, can you do any matching any part of the string, or if you have to match the entire thing. And you can search with one click. So it seems confusing that you put in a name and now you just click, 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 and you search all these different sources. So if I go and look for Lillian Small, I can look in Find a Grave, and that's her. And that's her getting married in 1929. Or I can search in Billion Graves, or I can search in jewishjada.com. And there she is. And if I ask to view it, then they will ask me for signing up for $18 for 3 months. I don't think I'll find her in Ottawa Jewish cemeteries, but I will find her in Jober, and that's for gravestone. So I'd like to thank Stanley Diamond, who introduced most of these resources to me. And my only suggestion is try the dashboard. So it's pretty easy to use. We can search for Leonard Cohen. And I'm going to search for a family tree for Leonard Cohen. I'm going to look on Jenny. Okay. And so there he is. So I'm going to do a trick here, which is I'm going to, I'm going to pin this, and I'm going to look for someone else. when Leonard Cohen died, the local news went to the Sharshmayim cemetery and took pictures of his grave, took video of his grave through the fence. People were not happy about this, but I was watching the news and I saw the name Garmays. Now I know that all Garmays in Montreal are related. So I knew that if I went to William Shatner and found out the relationship to Leonard Cohen, I would find out William Shatner is Leonard Cohen's fourth cousin. So that was surprising. And the reason is that William Shatner's mother is Anne Garmays. I didn't know that there were Garmayses related to Leonard Cohen, but given that they were buried right next to him, I thought there was a strong possibility. So on the JGS-Montreal homepage is this form. And so you can just go there and you can do searches right away. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, well, Gary, we have a few questions and comments. First of all,
Vicki, before we go to the questions and comments,
sure.
I would like to, first of all, thank Gary for all the work that he's done, which is just mind-boggling for me. And I think, while Gary's thanked me, I should mention, it's one thing to come up with an idea, to make a suggestion, to hint at something, but it's another thing to have someone like Gary take the ball and run with it. In fact, that was the history of JRI Poland, my idea to start with, but Michael Tobias and Steve Zedek taking that ball and running with it. So we all work together in order to come up with, things that are of value to a lot of different people. I just want to, for those who are not familiar with Montreal, as well as those of us who have born and brought up and know Montreal in and out, there's a couple things I should mention. One is Maimonides. Maimonides is the old age home. It was called the whatever, but it is the old age home just a mile down the road from me. A very, very large 6-floor building. And Gary has gone there and helped people develop a family tree. And by doing that, of course, it's been valuable because it gives people who are there something to talk about when their families come to visit. And I like to think that that inspires families perhaps to continue to do research in the future. The other thing that Gary mentioned was the Canadian Jewish Review. Canadian Jewish Review, which was published up until the 1970s, is a remarkable resource because if you find a wedding announcement, it mentions everybody who was there almost, where they were from, what their relationships are. And so you have a mini genealogical source in one publication. When my grandmother died in 1963, it listed everybody who was descended from my grandmother. So this can be a treasure if you find your family listed in there. Gary talked about the work of my wife, Ruth, who did the data entry of the 600,000 Canadian naturalization records over a period of 10 years. And there's no truth to the rumor that she was chained to the computer. It was a challenge. One of the interesting things along the way was her familiarity with names. And if you ask her a name that happens to sound Finnish, she'll know that it's Finnish. She'll know that it's one other, whether it's Danish or Dutch or whatever have you. So there's a little bit of side benefit. And in terms of the Drouin collection, when we talk about Drouin, what we're talking about are the Canadian, pardon me, are the Quebec birth marriage records. Quebec is the only jurisdiction in Canada, and like Louisiana, uh, that had the Napoleonic Code for its law. And just like in Poland, that the Jewish records were kept separately, they were kept separately in Montreal from 1841 to 1993 when the law was changed. And so we were blessed by having all these records in one place, all the Jewish records in one place. And that enabled us to find names which everyone might think are Christian names amongst the Jewish families. In addition, uh, when my wife did the extraction of the vital records of Quebec, these are full extractions, whereas on Ancestry you just have the basic index. So those of you who want a detailed analysis of family names or looking for names that you can't seem to find online, we have those full extracts of the vital records, principally the marriage, the births and the marriage records. When it comes to the Canadian naturalizations, we also have the original sources, the scans of the index pages. And when we look at the Montreal Circuit Court, there's a couple of very important things to know. In addition to what you can look at online, my wife, many years ago, added the place of birth, which doesn't appear in the search, the actual town of birth. So if you know that your family came, and this is an example for me, came from Sukhavola, we can search that particular source for all the people who were born in Sukhavola. And I found a relative that I never knew of by being able to do that. Um, uh, Finally, I think that when we talk about the cemeteries of Montreal, the Baron de Hirsch, the Back River, and other cemeteries as well, Gary has done a remarkable job in photographing more than 50,000, I think it may be up to 60,000 now, and coordinating the extraction of the information, getting it online to Jober, other sources as well, and also having that link back to our website with a lot more information that's been added over the years. So I just wanted to go into a little more detail on some of the aspects of what Gary was talking about today. I will tell you that I learned something today that I should have known before as well. One of the wonderful things about a dashboard like this, it becomes a checklist to make sure that you haven't forgotten to look at a source. Over the years, so many new sources have developed. So many sources are there for us to use. And now we have some way to use the checkbox and see everyone there. Okay, Vicki, over to you.
Okay. Yeah, well, you have a few congratulations. Gary Perlman, congrats, excellent job, bravo, and thank you for all of your hard work. We have people watching from Evergreen, Colorado, Naples, Florida, San Francisco, Boston, London, England, late at middle of the night, Port Townsend, Washington, North Lancaster, Ontario, New Jersey, and Toronto, which raised a question. Or several. Your searches, obviously you were doing your family and you did searches that were Montreal specific. Could you kind of summarize how this would still be of value for people in other Canadian provinces or even in other countries? Like how much could they get out of this dashboard, even though the emphasis is on Montreal and Quebec?
Okay, so census and naturalization apply across Canada. If you wanted to go outside Canada, then you could imagine a section for US naturalization, US censuses. If we go to, there's a general section, and you can search ancestry.ca. I'm going to do that. So here's 466,000 matches. That seems like too many, but you can restrict it to Canada. Okay. And for some of these, once you get into Canada or a subset like birth, death, and marriage, you can limit it to a particular province. While we're on this selection, down at the bottom, that you don't even know it's there, is Jewish. Okay, so you know, like Stanley was saying, a name like Small, well, it can be anything. But a Jewish name like Small, that's a lot more limited. So those limits are ways that you can imagine limiting it to. So inside Ancestry, for example, birth, marriage, and death, there's a selection of databases. I think it's at least 2, it might be 3, of birth, marriage, and death for Ontario. And so you can imagine adding an item, maybe just for Toronto, to search for those and limit it to that particular database.
Okay.
So that's I think one way that you can adapt things.
So, but basically, you're saying that there's a section that really applies to all of Canada, and your general section has what, about a dozen databases that could apply worldwide?
Well, there's 7 there, or so.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let me see what else I have here. Those were okay. This is again somewhat related, and it's quite funny. Air Bear, who are you, Air Bear, from San Francisco? Gary, do you know if anyone has created such a dashboard for lowest Canada, that is the US?
No, I don't. You know,
Yeah.
Ancestry is sort of like that. Like what Ancestry does is it gets data from a lot of different sources, and it puts like a, you know, a sort of common front end to all that data. Now, I don't have that capability. So what I do instead is I set up a bunch of searches to all of these different places. But the dashboard is, you know, it's just a little file of, you know, 5 to 10 lines on each resource that says, you know, here's the home page, here's how much it costs. It's going to have like one search form, and it's going to be called worldcat.org. And, you know, you go on to more and more resources, and it's just a little bit of information about a bunch of resources. So I could imagine, say, for these resources, setting up a query. And the query would say, well, I'm interested in Jewish Montreal and Quebec and Canada. But another query would be, I'm interested in non-Jewish, you know, Southern California. And so I'm interested in US things and stuff like that. So there's not a lot of investment in the actual, well, there's not a lot of investment in the dashboard or in the different resources. It's pretty easy to add a new resource, and it's pretty easy to modify a resource. So I'd be happy to work with someone to do that. You know, the hardest thing for me, say, thinking about Toronto, is well, besides the fact that, you know, there's 100,000 Torontonians who came from Montreal, and so they're just as interested in Montreal as any place. But you know, where would I put a resource for Toronto or for Ontario? I'm not sure where it would go, but if you said, you know, put it in general, fine, I could do that. Or I could imagine, instead of just searching ancestry.ca, I could add a little pull down menu like I have, let's see, up here, that says Search in Quebec, search in Canada, search the world, maybe search Ontario, and have a limit like that just for searching ancestry.
Gary, do you have any plans on expanding this to include other regions? Or, I mean, you're talking about theoretically what could be added. Is it something that you have any interest or desire to do?
No, if someone asked, I would be interested, but if no one asks, then I don't have any interest in doing it.
Okay. There was a question that was asked and answered. I'll read you the question and the answer from a mysterious gray one. I have an idea who that might be. Are there naturalization records after 1946? And gray one answered, there are naturalization index entries up until 1952. Only the ones to 1946 are indexed by name. The rest will be uploaded soon. Write to naturalizations at JGS-Montreal.org and we'll do a search. So we can kind of, I think I know who that is at JGS Montreal. My question is that if the index is expanded, will that be incorporated? I guess that you will update the dashboard accordingly to reflect that?
No.
Let me jump in, Gary.
Okay, you can jump in.
Yeah. Yes, the indexing of the post 1946 to 53 is finished. It is incorporated into the JGS of Montreal internal search system. So if somebody writes to JGS Vitals at jgs-montreal.org, we will be able to search the later naturalizations, just as we can search the Montreal Circuit Court naturalizations by town of birth. We have developed 5 separate internal databases that we use to help people. And Gary's familiar with it as well, of course. So I just want to go back to one other thing. Gary talked about the Lovell's City Directory. The Lovell City Directory, which you can search through Steve Morris's one-step pages. Strangely enough, it's listed under Vital Records. However, here's the key reason why you would want to look at the Montreal, excuse me, City Directory. In 1940, in Canada, there was a 1940 national census, a wartime registration. And that 1940 national registration called upon everybody over 16, whether they were a citizen or an alien, to register and to provide a substantial amount of information, including the parents' names and where the parents were born. So if you've got an immigrant, you not only have the immigrant's place of birth, but you have where his or her parents were born. It costs $45 plus tax, but it is a goldmine of information if you're searching for where somebody originated and you can't find a passenger list and you can't find anything else. And of course, that applies to all of Canada and therefore a resource for all Canadians and for everybody who has somebody in Canada at that time. So the other little bit of a hint is when you apply for the 1940 national registration, you have to give the address. And you should be giving the address from 1939, 40, and 41 because the timing of the registration is not accurate. Over to you, Gary. Or Vicky.
I think that's pretty much
Okay,
it.
Vicky, to amplify on my no, is that I don't need to do anything because this search over here for Canadian naturalization It says 1915 to 1951. It doesn't really matter what the final date is. It's whatever data they have. So when the data that has been compiled by Ruth Diamond is uploaded to the Canadian site, this will search it.
Automatically.
There's no change that's necessary. The same as, with most of these things, these databases are changing as we go along. And so like deaths happen, obituaries are published. And so the searches will change over time.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, there was one comment, Paul Bailey says, we need to have a search of the Cornwall, Ontario cemetery. And I'm wondering, yeah, I mean, this is something she's asking for. First of all, would that not show up? Would that not be one of the things that would show up on Joe Bar anyway? Would there be any reason to have it as a separate search? And why Cornwall?
Well, I would need a name, but actually we could just search for a name that's going to match. So just any cone, and we've searched Ontario. There's a lot. Oh, this is tough. So I can't search for Cornwall, and all of these are in Toronto area.
Gary, you can check the list of all the cemeteries on Jober.
That's true. So if we go there, we can look at the contents, and we go to Canada and Ontario, and
Cornwall's not there.
Cornwall is not there.
Okay.
So now they might have their own search on their site. And if that was the case, I'd be tempted to add something like I added for Ottawa to the death section of the JGS Montreal dashboard.
And there's none for Kingston, Ontario either. I believe, Gary, I think that the Ontario Genealogical Society may have indexed those.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they may have. I'm not too sure, but it's something people can ask about, people in Ontario or people who are interested in Ontario to contact the Ontario Genealogical Society.
Okay, well, I think that's it. I mean, people are discussing the fact that Cornwall's not listed, and they're writing. I don't know if they heard what Stanley just said, that contact the Ontario Genealogical Society and see if they have anything.
Okay, well, I guess we wind this up. First of all, thank you again to Gary. And let me just add one last thing. This is not rocket scientist. Anybody with reasonable technical experience could replicate this on a website anywhere in the world. The whole principle is to simplify research. And if there, as Gary has already said, if somebody has a question, somebody wants a little bit of help, he's here to help. So that being said, we thank everybody for attending this evening. For those of you in England, go to sleep. For those of you who are just waking up, have a nice day, and do come back and attend the next session of the Jewish Genealogical Society. That'll be in April, and Gary Schroeder, the president of the Quebec Family History Society, will be speaking. He is obviously an expert on the non-Jewish records, but he will be talking about Canadian records that are of interest to Jewish people. So that'll be sometime in April. I don't remember the date offhand. Do come back and be with us that evening. Thank you very much, everyone. Be well, stay safe, and we'll see you all soon.